When a white police officer stopped Amelia Johnson at the courthouse door, he didn't know he was standing before the district attorney. This moment of bias sparked a scandal that shook the city and revealed the depth of systemic racism. What happened next would astonish even the most seasoned observers, but let's start from the very beginning. The morning was gloomy, the air smelled of rain, and the area around the courthouse in downtown Springfield was bustling. Reporters and camera crews had taken their positions, preparing to cover a high-profile trial involving police corruption. Moving confidently through the crowd was Amelia Johnson, the district attorney whose actions often commanded both respect and fear among her opponents. She carried a case filled with carefully prepared documents for the trial. As Amelia approached the staff entrance, a white police officer blocked her path. His uniform bore the name Wilkins, and his expression betrayed irritation and distrust. "Excuse me, ma'am, but this entrance is for courthouse staff only," he said sharply, narrowing his eyes. "I'm the district attorney. I have a trial here," Amelia replied calmly, presenting her ID. "The district attorney?" Wilkins scoffed. "Your paper's fake? This entrance isn't for visitors like you. Use the main entrance like everyone else." By now, reporters had begun to gather, their cameras and phones already pointed at the scene. Amelia stepped forward, trying to keep her composure. "You're required to let me through. I have a court case in 10 minutes. This isn't up for debate," she said firmly, though her calm demeanor was beginning to give way to irritation. Wilkins, as if he hadn't heard, raised his radio and called for backup. "We've got an issue. Suspicious individual at the staff entrance claiming to be the district attorney. Need assistance." The reporters became even more animated. The crowd of onlookers began to murmur, and some were already live-streaming the unfolding drama on social media. Amelia realized the situation was spiraling out of control. She tried to maintain her composure, but the officer's next words hit her like an icy needle. "Ma'am, you'd better leave before we take more serious measures." Somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "That's Amelia Johnson!" Her name began to carry weight among the spectators, but Wilkins remained unmoved. The tension escalated, and Amelia felt her heart race. This was not just a personal humiliation. It had the potential to be the start of something much larger. The officer's call brought 2 patrol cars to the scene. Sergeant Wilkins stood stiffly, as if trying to project authority to the growing crowd. Captain Michaels approached, quickly surveying the situation. "Sergeant, what's going on here?" he asked, glancing at Amelia. "This woman claims she's the district attorney, but I have my doubts, Captain. Her ID is questionable, and her behavior is suspicious," Wilkins replied with a frown. Amelia, maintaining her composure, handed her documents to the captain. "I'm District Attorney Amelia Johnson. I have a scheduled hearing, and I demand immediate access to the courthouse." The captain examined the ID. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but before he could respond, Wilkins interjected. "Captain, it could be fake. We can't just let her in. It's better to call for more backup or investigate further." Amelia noticed the reporter's camera zoom in on her, the microphone picking up every word. "Are you seriously going to block me in front of the press while I'm trying to fulfill my duty?" she asked Captain Michaels, her voice measured but tinged with restrained anger. "This is a violation of the law and your professional code of conduct." The captain began to respond, but a young man in a business suit emerged from the crowd. It was Jason, her assistant, looking visibly concerned. "This is indeed District Attorney Johnson," he declared loudly for all to hear. "If you don't let her through immediately, this will become today's top news story." Wilkins ignored Jason's statement and stubbornly countered, "I'm doing my job. If anyone has an issue with my actions, they can take it up through proper channels." The crowd began to stir. Reporters shouted questions, and bystanders pulled out their phones. Amelia caught sight of someone live-streaming the entire incident on social media. The situation had reached a boiling point, and she realized this was no longer just a delay. It was a public crisis. Amelia stepped forward, standing directly in front of Wilkins. "If you continue to obstruct me, I will personally ensure your suspension. Right now, you're becoming part of the very problem we are working to fight against." At that moment, Judge Harris, known for his no-nonsense demeanor, emerged from the courthouse. "What is going on here? Why is the district attorney being delayed?" he called out loudly, instantly drawing everyone's attention. Wilkins paled, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control. Cameras were trained on him, and he began to grasp that this incident could be disastrous for his career. The crowd fell silent as Judge Harris, a tall man with a commanding presence and a booming voice, approached the scene. His serious gaze shifted from Amelia to Wilkins. "Sergeant, why is the district attorney standing outside when her session is set to begin in just a few minutes?" Harris asked coldly. "Your Honor," Wilkins began, clearly uneasy. "I wasn't sure of her identity. We have protocols, and I was just trying to protect the courthouse." Amelia, noticing how journalists were inching closer with their microphones, stepped forward. "Judge Harris, I arrived on time, but this officer seems to believe he has the authority to question my identity and my right to be here. I've already shown my credentials, but they've been ignored." The judge turned to Captain Michaels, who was now staring tensely at Wilkins. "Captain, your team today is not upholding the law. It's standing in its way," Harris said. "I want the district attorney escorted into the courtroom immediately. Handle this, or I'll personally file a complaint with your department." Captain Michaels nodded, the weight of the situation evident in his stiff posture. He turned to Amelia. "Ms. Johnson, my apologies. Please, go ahead." But Amelia didn't move. She locked eyes with Wilkins. "This isn't just a misunderstanding, Sergeant. It's a glaring example of how bias and abuse of power erode trust in law enforcement. You should be ashamed." Wilkins opened his mouth to respond, but the surrounding journalists had already started peppering him with questions. "Sergeant Wilkins, how do you justify your actions? Was this racism or simply an abuse of power?" one reporter demanded. Wilkins stayed silent, his face betraying his growing discomfort. Meanwhile, the cameras flashed and reporters broadcast the scene live on social media. The incident was quickly gaining traction, and waves of critical comments began flooding the streams. The situation reached its climax when a prominent local TV journalist declared loudly, "This incident highlights not just a systemic problem, but a personal bias exhibited by those in power." Recognizing the gravity of the moment, Amelia seized the opportunity to speak. "Let the public decide who is at fault here. For now, I must proceed to do my job despite the obstacles placed in my path." She walked toward the courthouse entrance, her every step illuminated by the flashes of cameras and accompanied by murmurs of approval from the crowd. Wilkins remained frozen in place, acutely aware that he had just become the face of a national scandal. Amelia entered the courtroom with her head held high, though the tension in the air was palpable. The proceedings began with a 15-minute delay, and the public, including the journalists in attendance, continued to murmur about the incident at the courthouse entrance. Judge Harris glanced at the prosecutor and signaled for the trial to commence. Before Amelia could deliver her opening statement, her assistant Jason leaned over and whispered, "The video from earlier has gone viral. It's already a topic on national news. Sergeant Wilkins is facing major scrutiny." Amelia nodded, maintaining her focus. She presented the court with compelling evidence in the corruption case, her voice firm and resolute. Yet even as she spoke, she was keenly aware that her personal clash with law enforcement had grown into something far larger than a local incident. By evening, the entire city was abuzz. The footage of Wilkins ignoring the district attorney's credentials was dissected frame by frame. Outrage poured in from social media. "This is blatant racism," one user wrote. "The system is rotten to the core," added another. The police department found itself in a state of disarray. Captain Michaels was summoned to an emergency meeting, where Wilkins' actions were scrutinized in detail. Later that day, the department held a press conference. The police chief addressed the public. "We are launching an internal investigation. Such behavior is unacceptable." Meanwhile, Amelia chose to go beyond mere public statements. She gave an interview to one of the region's most prominent journalists, where she declared, "This incident highlights the urgent need for police reform. It's not the first time power has been wielded against the people it's meant to protect." The public conversation on racism and police abuse intensified. Peaceful protests advocating for justice began to take shape across the city, with Amelia's experience becoming a rallying point for those demanding change. Sergeant Wilkins was temporarily suspended, but his name remained tarnished by the scandal. Many residents called for his permanent removal from the force. Amelia triumphed in the corruption case, presenting irrefutable evidence that justice could prevail when the system was held accountable. After the verdict was announced, she turned to her colleagues in the courtroom and said, "This is not just a victory in this case. It's a reminder that silence in the face of injustice only strengthens it." The incident marked the beginning of significant changes. The police department implemented mandatory bias training programs, and Amelia became a symbol of the fight for equality and justice. She demonstrated that change is possible when one has the courage to act.